Perfect. We're going to call the June 13th regular council meeting to order. Excuse me. We had one person registered for the open mic that I don't see here yet. Was there anybody else here for the open mic? All right, we will come back to it if we need to. Item 7, consent agenda.
Can we do an adoption of the agenda first, please?
Of course we can, yeah.
Thank you.
Looking for an adoption of the agenda. Councillor Billingsley.
So moved.
Any additions or deletions? We're ready for the question. Those in favor? Carried. All right, now we're getting to the consent agenda. Looking for a motion? Councillor Blatz.
I move that City Council consent to approve the following agenda items without debate. Approval of, excuse me, approval of minutes, regular council meeting May 24th, 2022, correspondence letter from Medicine Hat and District Genealogical Branch, AGS.
Moved by Councillor Blatz. Ready for the question? Those in favor? Carried. Item 10, Committee of the Whole. We have a delegation from the Wetaskiwin Genealogical Society. Come right up. Is that mic on, Councillor Billingsley? Perfect. Good morning.
Good morning. I'll speak first. My name is Sharon Aney. Good morning, Mayor Gundam, ladies and gentlemen of the City Council. Thank you for allowing us to be here to advocate on behalf of the City Archives, and we hope that you will keep in mind some of the points that we bring forward today as you deliberate in the future regarding this issue. I thank Ms. Boddy for running a slideshow that I have prepared for today. It is only 17 slides, and she'll run it on a bit of a loop so that if you miss something, it'll come back to you. Russ and I moved to Wetaskiwin 55 years ago. As a volunteer in early archives and a past member of the Heritage Museum Board, I have grown to appreciate and value the history of our adopted home. City Archives is the major repository of Wetaskiwin's history. As I was thinking of our presentation before Council, I hoped that you would be able to tell us that our presence is totally unnecessary. I use the word hope because for the past 4 years or so, we have not heard reassuring words about the archives. Only a threat of closure in 2018, and then a sudden closure in 2020. We appreciate that the city has engaged Myers Norris Penny to do an analysis and recommendation regarding the reopening. However, we are concerned that one study has led to another study. The building that houses the archives is for sale, and a current condition to purchase contains the requirement of a 4-year lease to archives. Could this mean that we will be in this same position 4 years from now again, if the lease is not renewed? I do note that the city budget for 2022 through 2025 does include expenses of approximately $84,000 for archives. But since none of those amounts appear to be for salaries, our questions as to whether it will be reopened to the public are still not answered. We are not only the two people who have used and hope to continue to use our archives. Local organizations have used information in the archives to celebrate Wetaskiwin people and events because information was received there and saved in years past. Some examples are the Wetaskiwin District Sports Hall of Fame has honored 75 individuals and teams. Karen, I don't see the...
Would you like it up now?
Yes, please. Wetaskiwin District Sports Hall of Fame has honored over 75 individuals and teams. Committees have researched to build displays for 2 high school reunions, which, by the way, impacted our economy, as in 2017, over 700 visitors came home to celebrate. Remembrance Day celebrations at the Legion often honored veterans with a display prepared by the archivist of the day. Our city's own website states that, quote, the City of Wetaskiwin Archives receives many requests for information from all over the globe. Journalists, historians, broadcasters, authors, teachers, and students are only a few of the many groups who have inquired about Wetaskiwin's past." End quote. People have been researching and will continue to search for the information that will fill in the gap in whatever historic picture they are creating. Wetaskiwin's portion of the picture should fit into the larger jigsaw puzzle of history: the legal history of Alberta, the economic history of Alberta and Canada, immigration, the ethnic and family histories of people who came to settle here and live here and grow our city over 130 years. When the pictures of history are made, will Wetaskiwin's place be recognized, or will we be the missing piece of the puzzle, a hole in the larger picture? The United Nations endorsed the following Universal Declaration on Archives at the 36th session of the General Conference of UNESCO in Paris on November 10, 2011. It states that archives are a unique and irreplaceable heritage passed from one generation to another. Archives are managed from creation to preserve their value and meaning. They are authoritative sources of information underpinning accountable and transparent administrative actions. They play an essential role in the development of societies by safeguarding and contributing to individual and community memory. Open access to archives enriches our knowledge of human society, promotes democracy, protects citizens' rights, and enhances the quality of life. So much of current life is built upon what has happened in the past, our history. We can build on the positives, learn from the negatives, we can celebrate accomplishments, events, and developments, and recognize the people who made them come to pass. But we can't do that if we don't know what and who they are. It would be a great disservice to Wetaskiwin and our people, past, present, and future, to give our historical documents, photos, and newspapers away, to throw them away, or to hide them. If Wetaskiwin's history is important, then archives are important. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Alice now.
Thank you, Sharon. Good morning, Mayor and City Councillors. My name is Alice Hoyle. I am the President of the Wetaskiwin Genealogical Society. I was born in the city of Wetaskiwin. I currently live in the county of Wetaskiwin. My parents were both born in the county of Wetaskiwin. My grandparents and great-grandparents came here in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Perhaps that's why I care so deeply about the preservation of this area's history. Volunteer researchers for our society assist people from all over the world. They contact us wanting to know about family members from this region. The information stored in the archives has helped with those requests. We receive various requests, family and non-family related. Some examples. June 2021, Ken Montgomery, great-grandson of Hugh John Montgomery, former Wetaskiwin merchant, mayor, and MLA, had a picture of a hockey team and wanted to clarify the names of the players. Would have been an easy request for the former archivist, but with the archives closed, he was unable to ask her the question. December 2021, Alberta Association of Agricultural Societies, looking for a picture of one of the past presidents, Carl J. Hansen from Wetaskiwin. He was president in 1958 to 62, and a write-up would have been in the Wetaskiwin Times. I could not assist because the newspaper was in the archives and unavailable. January this year, author from Toronto contacted me wanting pictures of Judge W.A.O. Lees. A Wetaskiwin Times article dated August 1934 talked about a banquet in Judge Lee's honor. The author asked for a copy of the article. I could not assist him because the archives was closed. He mistakenly thought the archives was closed due to COVID, but I advised this was not the case, that the city was assessing the value and function of the archives. His response was, and I quote, "We might complain about a lot of things in Toronto, but at least the archives and library remain really good resources here. I wish you all the luck in trying to convince city councillors to reinstate the archives. Perhaps this isn't the type of publicity you would prefer to have." Lack of transparency. The city developed a new promotional tagline, "The City We Share." But what does this mean? Have you shared by way of an ad in the local papers the fact that you are considering eliminating non-city archival material from the archives? Have you told stakeholders, those who entrusted their records to your care, that you are considering their history to be expendable? Note the documents provided to you. AP1, this is the agreement signed by city staff. When someone donated our items to the archives, it clearly states that the city accepts the item in quotes for preservation. AP2 from the city's website. Here you outline how important the archives is, even headlining one of the sections, ensuring Wetaskiwin's legacy lives on. As diligent City Council members, I expect you have thoroughly read the MMP report presented to Council last fall. Some notable items in the report are AP3, Archival Holdings, confirms that some of the items date from around 1850s to recent years. These are precious items. They need to be cared for properly. AP4 notes the private records help tell the story of Wetaskiwin, supplementing the municipal records. AP5, Considerations. Important sections in this report have been noted for you. AP6, Municipal Focus Model. Note the items that have been starred and the arrow pointing to staff requirement. How is this a saving? You won't hire an archivist and keep the archives functional, but you would need to hire more staff for the records management / FOIP department. AP7, MNP notes, FOIP requests for information must be responded to within 30 days. If City Council chooses option 3, this will be the method people use to request information from the city, including the requests our society receives. AP8, MNP notes the archives provided information for 389 requests in 2019, and that the requests have more than doubled between 2012 and 2019. I suspect this number will continue to grow. Incidentally, according to the Archives Society of Alberta, Wetaskiwin's archives prior to closing was getting 3,000 online views per year on the Alberta On Record website. AP9, Desired Future State. I think this document says it all. Please review this before making any final decision about the archives. At a time when people in the other parts of the world are fighting and dying to preserve their history and culture, it seems inconceivable that the city would voluntarily dispense with 50% of the items in the archives. In the big scheme of things, the cost of keeping the archives open and available to the public is small compared to other revenue-negative facilities within the city of Wetaskiwin. Do you, as a city council, feel comfortable being known as the group of people who cared so little for the historical records of this region that you cast them aside? Hopefully, the municipality in the area you originate from has cared for their historical records. Wouldn't it be sad if your descendants found out that your family history was not worthy of being preserved? Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much for your time. We wish you well in your future deliberations and hope you will keep our comments. Thank you.
I'm going to go back to our open mic as Heidi is here.
Could we could we do a
I'm
motion
sorry,
for
yeah.
that one? Thanks.
A motion to accept as information. Councillor Billingsley?
I move that City Council accepts the presentation as information. And I do have just one quick question to Alice, actually. You had said that somebody from Toronto was wanting some information on from the newspapers. Yeah. Is any of that information available through the provincial archive, through the Wetaskiwin papers?
I don't think the provincial archives has the Wetaskiwin newspapers. I did refer him to the legislative library at the legislature. I believe they have copies of all the newspapers.
So there is another copy of the newspapers.
I referred them there, I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Anything else? Ready for the question? Those in favor? Carried. Welcome, Heidi.
Good morning, Mayor and councillors. My name is Heidi McFadden. I am a member of the Wetaskiwin congregation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And for the last 3 years, I have been in charge of the annual food drive in our city that supports the Salvation Army Food Bank. Our church has organized food drives in Alberta for over 20 years. In the Edmonton and Calgary areas, they do it in September, but Wetaskiwin has always been done in June. The purpose of the food drive is to help those in need. It is entirely volunteer-driven. People volunteer their time to deliver flyers and bags, and then to collect the donations and to put them on the shelves at the food bank. Now, unfortunately, no one from the Salvation Army was able to join me today, but Melissa Mailman, who is the Community Ministries Officer with the Wetaskiwin branch of the Salvation Army, has provided the following comments. And this is a quote from her. "We wish we could be here today, but unfortunately we are not able to be. Thank you for the opportunity to share. We have seen an increased number of people using the food bank. These people consist of working families struggling to make ends meet, as well as more seniors coming due to the inflated cost of living. We have been helping 38 families 2 days per week through appointments. These numbers reflect families, not the total number of people. Many of these families have 6 to 8 people in them. This means the hamper we build is much bigger and takes more resources. The actual number of families we help throughout the week is closer to 60 because we have people coming in to get emergency food without an appointment. We have had to purchase food twice within 1 month because we couldn't keep up with the needs of our community. Food drives like this one are very important to our cause. They help restock our shelves and give the community an opportunity to help us serve those who need a little help. We do ask that when people donate to please be mindful of the expiry dates of the food that they are donating. We are grateful for all of the support we receive, and we are excited to have fully stocked shelves again. More ideas for future donations aside from this food drive. We also accept fresh, frozen produce, dairy, and meat. The best thing to do is call us and we can give more details about this. Thanks in advance to the community for its support." The Salvation Army moved to a new location last summer, and I don't know if any of you have had an opportunity to go see it, but their food bank area is it's much improved over their previous location, and they do have some very nice freezer and fridge space, and it's I imagine it's a much more pleasant experience, and I know when we go restock, we're looking forward to being in a place that's got a little bit of air circulation rather than the basement where they used to be. So basically I'm here today just to share this information with you and help you understand a little bit about what the food drive is. Anyone wanting to be involved in the food drive can donate food. That's the easiest way. This week is our flyer delivery, so you should get a flyer and a bag in your mailbox at some point this week, and you just fill the bag and leave it on your front porch and someone will pick it up. If you would like to assist in flyer delivery, you can contact me for an individual route that you can deliver at your convenience between now and Thursday evening, or you can join our youth group on Wednesday evening at 6:30 at our church building, which is southeast of the mall on 36th Avenue, as they will be gathering to deliver flyers to any routes that have not been covered by individuals or families. If you're interested in helping to pick up donations on Saturday morning, again, just let me know. I do have a flyer here for the food drive, and it has my phone number on it. Karen, can I just leave that with you? So that's the information I have. And Mayor, I was a little bit distracted when I met you last week. I think you said that you wanted to do a route. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, I have the stuff for you.
Perfect.
Any questions?
Go ahead.
It's right here at the bottom.
Karen will have it.
I'll take copies and get them for everyone.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, well, absolutely. Thank you. All right. Item 10B, we have Chief Superintendent Tufik here. Welcome, sir.
Morning, Mayor, councilors. I am joined virtually by Jean Boda from the Alberta Crime Prevention Association, as well as Felix Munger and Audrey Manette from the Canadian Municipal Network for Crime Prevention. I do have a slide deck. Perhaps we could start with that. So the order we're going to go in is I'm just going to provide some information first, and I'm going to invite my virtual partners to add some information. This is building on some of the previous conversations we've had. So I'm just going to recap some of that information, and then we'll be open for some discussion. Do I have control over this slideshow? Okay, so we can go to... What's that? Fair enough. If we go to the next slide, that'd be great. Thanks. So today I'm providing you some information really for a decision. So this is a decision briefing. We're going to be looking for direction from Council to support transferring the administration of the Community Safety and Wellbeing Committee to the RCMP K Division for 1 year to manage the administration of the committee. If Council approves it, the RCMP will be looking for support for funding to develop the strategy by engaging the expertise of the Canadian Municipal Network for Crime Prevention to work in collaboration with the administration, Alberta Crime Prevention Association, Reach Edmonton, and the RCMP. And to give you some context for the decision today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of the Community Safety and Wellbeing Strategy. I'm going to talk about the importance of the Advisory Committee. We're going to talk about how this fits into the RCMP strategy that we're putting together. And last, I'll invite the other stakeholders to provide some input, to provide some additional context. So I had already spoken to Council about, this is really about collective impact. This is about bringing people from different disciplines, different expertise together to really start impacting the problem. And a lot of what I'm going to speak to you about today is trying to take that holistic view to crime reduction, not just looking at the offense and the offender, which we do traditionally through enforcement, but thinking about some of those other factors that lead people to be in those situations. The next slide. Thanks. And we just go right to the next one. So we had provided a report to the city on the top 3 homicide locations in Alberta. And we really started to drill down into, and Wetaskiwin is listed as one of those locations. When we started to look at what the reasons were behind some of these offenses, we see drug and alcohol is prevalent in almost 70% of the 16 homicides. And we can go to the next slide. Methamphetamine was a lifestyle factor, and again, almost 70%. And we know that methamphetamine addictions is often driven or made worse by things like poverty, mental health issues, childhood trauma, food and housing insecurities. And so, when I talk about that holistic approach, it's really about addressing the overall issues and that multi-agency approach to trying to solve some of the problems that lead to these outcomes that we're talking about here today. Intergenerational trauma being another factor. I know we discussed this. We had children that were present during some of these homicides, and really we know that trauma gets passed down generation to generation, and how do we start to reduce and limit the impact of that trauma and violence and stop that cycle of violence from repeating. So if we can go to the next slide too, thanks. I talked a little bit about that stream, and a lot of the things when we talk about the effects of, the actual crimes committed, the violence committed, those are really kind of those downstream effects, the reactive outcomes. That's where we really apply that enforcement strategy that we put together. I talked to Council previously about some of the strategies we put together for enforcement. But there's a limitation to how effective those can be in the big picture and in actually stemming some of the problems. When we talk about some of the contributing factors to the homicides, that's not something I can solve with policing, trying to address some of those underlying issues that lead to those terrible outcomes. As we start to move upstream, we have programs like the Virtual Opioid Dependency Program I spoke to Council about. We partnered with Alberta Health Services. That's about trying to do some intervention at that individual level. Our offender management program, which I've also spoken about, where we've had some very good success. We've seen a 36% reduction in recidivism with offenders that choose to work with us. And these are offenders that are creating the greatest crime impact. But again, that's on an individual level. As we continue to move upstream, the work that the Canadian Municipal Network for Crime Prevention is doing in communities across the country, and some communities right here in Alberta, that's where we're starting to make that community impact and really starting to make some differences that lead to some of those outcomes that we see downstream. If we can go to the next one, I believe it's a video. I'm just going to introduce it briefly, and I'm going to let the video play. It's very short, but I can't say it, I don't think, any better than that video. So this was done by the Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council. It is about upstream approaches to community safety. It does talk about crime reduction and some of the important things. So I would just want to give them credit for the video production. I do have a link if anyone's interested in that afterwards. So if we go to the next slide and just play the video.
When we ignore the many factors that shape people's attitudes, choices, and actions, we limit our ability to prevent crime from happening in the first place. A broad understanding of why crime happens brings prevention into focus. People's actions don't happen in isolation. Our environment plays a key role in how we behave. Early life experiences, the health of community, opportunities for recreation, employment, social norms, as well as income and housing are just some of the factors that are connected to crime. By shifting upstream and getting closer to the source of the problem, we improve many more lives than by just focusing on the individual. Upstream prevention means we create an environment in which all people have a range of opportunities to grow, to learn, to work, to play, to connect, and to love and be loved. By working upstream, we increase the chances that everyone can reach their potential. This, in turn, goes a long way in reducing crime. A lot more upstream prevention leads to better long-term results and decreases the need for reactive measures. Creating an environment in which everyone can reach their potential is possible, and we all have a role to play. So let's make prevention matter. Learn more at www.preventingcrime.ca.
So, we're here talking today about that Community Safety and Wellbeing Committee for Wetaskiwin. Wetaskiwin was one of the communities working with the Canadian Municipal Network, Alberta Crime Prevention Association, and Reach Edmonton to help build community capacity to reduce crime. I've been advocating in concert with CMNCP, Alberta Crime Prevention Association, and Reach to create a community-based forum. We really want to break down the silos, start sharing information, use an evidence-based approach to identify common high-risk problem areas, and collaborate to work on identified issues from a multidisciplinary standpoint. We really think the Community Safety and Wellbeing Committee can be that vehicle to help us achieve that. I'm going to talk a little bit, I've talked to you guys about data to action, but I want to talk about how that fits into that work. So go to the next slide. Really the progression of data to action, which is what we're using principally for our enforcement action, and we do have our offender management strategy as one of the keys in there. But really the next evolution of that is data to action for communities. It's having that community involvement, bringing in non-government partners as well as other government agencies that aren't enforcement focused. It's about that creating that holistic approach, integrating our service delivery so that we're really maximizing our effectiveness and improving community outcomes to reduce crime and victimization at the end of the day. So I'm just going to welcome some of my stakeholders to speak. If I can start with Jean, perhaps you can kick us off. I think you're muted, Jean.
I think what we are going to do is I'll let Felix and Audrey go first and just give a little bit of an overview on the community safety plan.
Sure, that's great.
Yeah.
So welcome everyone, and thank you for being here, and thank you, Peter, and Mayor and Council, Jean Boda, and everyone else who's there. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name is Felix Munger, and I, together with Audrey Monette, we both work for the Canadian Municipal Network on Crime Prevention. Very quickly, so some of you will have heard of us, I hope so, given that you're also part of the pilot project with the Alberta Community Crime Prevention Association and Reach Edmonton. But we're a not-for-profit organization supporting communities across the country to increase community safety and decrease crime at the local level. We are working with hundreds of communities, really. We have a membership. We represent about 100 communities currently across the country. We work regularly with many, many communities, supporting them to do this kind of work. So today, normally we talk much more about what we're doing, but today we wanted to just very quickly talk about the community safety and well-being planning that's happening across the country. And to give you a little bit of context, and this may not be the case in Wetaskiwin in your community, but across the country, between 60 and 80% of all calls to police are not crime-related, making it really hard for police to focus on some of the things that they're really good at and that they should be doing. So as you see here, so many of the things that, other than keeping the peace and of course, working with people who are engaging in criminal activity, but there is things that are homelessness, domestic violence, and not all of this is a crime issue, mental health issues, addiction issues. Many of these are more health and social services related, but keeping police busy, which often then puts police in a situation where they actually don't have jurisdiction. So you'll all have heard the stories of police waiting 8 hours or longer with someone at an emergency service in a community. And then there's also the revolving door with the justice system. These are some of the things we're seeing across the country, and I'm not trying to pretend that this is exactly the reality in Wetaskiwin, but I would bet that it probably is a very close reality locally. I'm going to hand it over to Audrey now to talk a little bit about multi-sectoral approach and the sample plan and give you some ideas what they look like.
Yeah, so just to piggyback on that previous slide, there's this increasing understanding that a lot of challenges in communities could be addressed through this kind of collaborative service delivery model that really leverages the strengths of different partners in a community and of all the sectors that ultimately play a role in the broader safety and well-being of that community. And it's really that idea that underlies this concept of community safety and well-being planning. And so I really wanted to stress the importance of that collaboration at all stages of the planning process. So, recognizing that to effectively identify and address priority areas or challenges in a community, really the importance of receiving input and feedback from a bunch of different groups. Some of them are listed on the slide here, but engaging with stakeholders and residents, as well as people with lived and living experience and all those different sectors that play a role. It's really this understanding, this idea of a multi-sectoral approach, that there's not one single entity or sector that has the capacity on its own to address the complex risks and the different needs that are associated with something as nuanced and complex as community safety. And so I think Peter will talk about this in just a moment, but to ensure that multi-sectoral approach, having an advisory committee that can help oversee the process, provide some feedback, leverage some partnerships in the community, it is really important to that broader planning process. And so having that advisory committee that includes, representation from different sectors, and having a group of people with a range of different knowledge and skills and resources that they can leverage through the process tends to lead to success in these planning processes. So with regards to that process, this slide just provides a bit of an overview of an example of what that planning process can look like. Obviously, this varies from one community to another, but typically would start with, the initial planning. This is where the advisory committee would be established. There would be efforts to create some kind of common understanding of the work and the objectives and timelines and that sort of thing. And then usually the bulk of the planning process is really about conducting what we like to call a community safety assessment. to really get a sense at the local level, okay, so what are the key challenges? What are the needs in our community? What are the things that we're seeing? And obviously that requires to collect a bunch of different forms of data, some that can be quantitative, so looking at existing statistics that are available through the police, through different organizations at the local level. And then some communities also choose to administer a survey to the community, which allows residents to provide some thoughts about their perceptions of safety and well-being. And then in addition to the quantitative data, it's often felt helpful to also collect some qualitative data. So really having conversations with community members, consulting with different groups to do sort of a deeper dive into people's perceptions and feelings of safety to better understand some of the complexities related to some of the issues that may come up. And then obviously once all that information is collected, there's an analysis process that's done to look through the information and say, okay, so what are the challenges that are really floating to the top as we start to review the information that's collected? And then there can be, a process to prioritize those and say, okay, well, based on our current capacity, what challenges are going to be addressed in the plan in the short, medium, and long term? What kind of actions do we want to implement? And then obviously all of that is kind of compiled and presented into a nice shiny document at the end. And we have a couple of examples of some of the communities that we've worked with in the past couple of years. So you see the city of Regina here, Caribou-Chilcotin, which is a region in BC. The city of Williams Lake is part of that region, as well as the Kelowna Community Safety Plan. These are all available publicly as well if some of you are interested, but we thought we'd provide an example of kind of the final product and what that looks like.
Another example could be Morinville. We've worked with Morinville. We're currently working with Wetaskiwin County to help them, support them, develop their community safety and well-being plans. And these kind of plans, many of these have been around for quite a while. Ontario has actually legislated communities to do this. And I want to wrap it back in case you're wondering why we're presenting you this. And it's this big question of the why you're playing. And it goes back to what Peter said earlier, is in order to get ahead, because what we tend to do is we tend to respond to issues, to crisis. In order to get ahead of that, policing isn't always the solution to this. There is, for a good number of things, policing is the solution, but for a good number of issues, policing isn't the solution. And this is creating an understanding of what are some of these risk factors, what are the root causes that is leading to the level of lack of safety, to the level of criminal activity in the community, and trying to get ahead of that, recognizing how do we work with children today so that they don't go down that path? How do we help people that are currently on this path to get out? And while we tend to think that policing is a solution to this, it isn't always the solution. And I think that's why it's important. And this is why we're here. This is why we showed you this. I think we're good here. I don't think we need the last slide. So I'm happy to answer some questions afterwards, but I think now over to Jean Boda.
Thanks, Felix. Do you want me to all carry on? Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Felix and Audrey, and good morning, Mayor and Council Wetaskiwin. My name is Jean Boda. I am the co-chair of the Building Capacity and Rural Crime Prevention. With Jan Fox. Jan was unable to meet this morning with us as well. But I just want to, in summary, I just wanted to say Peter and Jan and I and Audrey talked, a year and a half ago when we found out about his Data to Action program, because to us it aligned with what we were looking to do with the community safety plan. Peter is collecting data from his crime stats, from his partners, and the community safety plan, the advisory committee, the groups sitting around are collecting data from the agencies, the service groups, the institutions, whatever. So to us, we saw an alignment and something that was needed. It would just complement and add to all the data that could be collected.
And I also just wanted to say that we have 5 pilot sites, all in different stages. We have one south of Calgary, or near Calgary, that has established an advisory committee of around 26 different agencies, institutions, church groups, service groups, whatever. They even have a group of farmers, a farm committee, which I thought was very, very interesting. And when we go to meet with them, and actually Jan and I are going down the 28th, they're very engaged and very empowered. They feel like they're being part of the solution as opposed to sitting back and just letting everything go on. And everything begins in our communities when we have strong-based community programs. And like Felix alluded to, policing, prisons, and the justice system is all reactive. And we want to be proactive in how we're dealing with this. Will it give us instantaneous results? No, we know that. But it's a progress that is needed. Also, our citizens feel, and this is what I've been seeing, they feel empowered, they feel like they've got some kind of a say in what's going on. I just want to speak, I am in my previous life, I also was a counselor, but in municipalities, we always have plans, right? The IDP, the MDP, the ASP, the emergency awareness plan, but nobody thinks of community safety plans for the safety of our communities. And I think it's this idea that we feel that the policing is our go-to. They will make us safe. Yes, they will. They're part of the plan. But also as a community, we have to gather together and understand what is going on in our community and how we can make a difference. And being from rural Alberta, I hear a lot of people say, and this is urban and rural, about changing the justice system. Yes, I understand there's issues with the justice system. But if we're to go forward and make any changes, we're going to have data and material to do that. You can't go with your stories and hope that things will change. So to me, this is all part of that process as well. I'm not saying it's something that has to be done, but I'm just putting this out there, that if we want to start changing concepts that are going on within the country, I think we have to understand that we need the data and we need the information that's there, evidence that this is really what's going on. Because sometimes what we think is going on is really not what's going on. And also if we want to advocate for different shelters or some kind of prevention methods, we have to have the data and the evidence. So in closing, that's really all I've got to say. And if there's any questions, please feel free.
Thank you. If we could just flip back to my presentation, I just have something in conclusion. Yeah, I spoke to council about this previously. You know, when we looked at that nexus between data to action and the community safety plan, and we wanted to build, you know, data to action for communities, you know, we selected Wetaskiwin as a site. So we want to move forward with this. You know, the goal is to create a sustainable model with measurable outcomes to improve community safety and well-being in Wetaskiwin. We're looking for council to support transferring the administration of the committee to the RCMP for 1 year so we can establish a working model. This will be the first time, you know, we're creating this model. So, you know, I think we're well positioned to take that on. I've been running data to action now for over 3 years. We've had some very good success, but it's limited to enforcement. So we want to broaden that impact. And if approved, as I said, we'll be looking for support to fund and develop the community safety and well-being strategy. By engaging CMN, CP, and working in collaboration with the RCMP, Alberta Crime Prevention, and Reach Edmonton to help develop that strategy. That's all I have for this morning. I think we're all open to questions.
When you say looking for support for funding, the city then would be funding the initiative?
So there are 3 options, I think, to consider in that funding. And I'll go through them in order of complexity. So I think the simplest direct route, obviously, is the city funding that development of that strategy plan directly. The next is applying for grant money, and I can tell you I've already spoken with Jean, and Alberta Crime Prevention Association is willing to do that, but we have to do the research on what grant funding might be available, and the timing of that, obviously, we'd have to figure out as well. The last option would be the RCMP contracting directly. I will tell you, and I don't know if you have any experience with the federal government contracting and procurement process, that's probably the longest timeline, and you know, our hope is that we can actually implement a little sooner. And obviously there's lots of combinations in between. So, you know, maybe it's about trying to get something set up and established while we work through some of the other processes to, you know, secure some additional funding. So it would be support. Obviously, I think it affects the city of Wetaskiwin directly, the work that we're talking about. And we're just looking for some support across, I'd say, those three options as we look to implement this committee.
Councillor Billingsley.
So you're looking for a 1 year to transfer it to the RCMP as opposed to what it is now. So what's a win? How do we, after year one, how do we measure to say this was good, this was well worth the investment?
Yeah, I understand. So I think year one is really about getting all of that background research information together, getting all the stakeholders, creating the advisory committee, getting the input, identifying those key issues, identifying the evidence that we want to get in order to make those decisions about where we move forward. I'll maybe invite Felix and Audrey to chime in there to add on to my comments around that, but the win for year one.
So one piece of clarification I think is important to put out there, that is that the risk factors and root causes of crime, the reasons why people commit criminal activity, why they become addicted, why they become homeless or experience homelessness, those are long-term problems that need long-term solutions. Unfortunately, there is very little to be said for a quick fix. When we develop our plans, normally we do put in place the idea of what are some of the immediate things that can be done. But generally speaking, I'll give you an example. Reach Edmonton, which is responsible for making Edmonton safer. They're talking about making it safer in 1 generation, recognizing that this is not the kind of thing you can do. This is almost suggesting you put $1 away each week and then you think after a certain amount you'll have $1 million. It's just, it takes time. These things take time and investment. Having said that, there is some wins that will likely come out of that we've seen in many other communities, and that's a community that could include businesses and local stakeholders rallying together to then afterwards both investing and in terms of resources or investing energy into the development, the implementation of a plan. So what we've been finding is by bringing these and this is across Canada, the bringing together of the multi-stakeholder groups, there is a buy-in that happens. There is a recognition of ownership amongst all the others. Essentially 1 year will set the stage to start working on an implementation on a plan like this to make your community safer. I don't know, Audrey, if you wanted to comment as well.
Yeah, no, I think that piece around creating buy-in in the short term is really a key. And I think these plans too, they're not a static document, right? It's really building a framework that can be revisited throughout the years to say, okay, let's reassess, are there new priorities or new challenges that have come up? But there's still that structure in place to constantly address them, which tends to be quite helpful in communities. And I will say too that while a lot of the challenges are quite long-term, they require, you know, systems change and addressing some deep-rooted issues, there are also a lot of actions that can be implemented to address some things short-term as well. And it's really finding that balance between the two that I think makes these plans quite successful.
Yeah, actually, if I can just add in, because I think, you know, there's there's two other components we're talking about. So we're talking about that midstream, if you remember my stream analogy, where there are some interventions that we can take, and I think that's a matter of having some of those stakeholders at the table. And if I can speak to our integrated offender management, I talked about that 36% reduction in recidivism with the offenders that choose to work with us. That can take, obviously anywhere from 6 months to a year of working with an offender. Having said that, the impact that those offenders have, I can tell you that's led to some pretty dramatic decreases in crime because they're selected because of the harm score that they have, the amount of crime impact that they're making in a community. So I think some of the short-term wins that we're talking about, and from a policing perspective, why we're looking to get some of the stakeholders around the table, I think are around some of those midstream efficiencies we can get. I use that example, the partnership with Alberta Health Services. It's breaking down those barriers, taking advantage of those programs, and trying to figure out how do we bring those together. The longer term things that they're talking about, these are going to take longer amounts of time to accomplish, but at least we'll be focused on what those issues are and how we can start to get there. So I think there will be some advantages in terms of that intervention that we'll see some results from, but I think, as they've already talked about, I think those longer term things will be more difficult. From a policing standpoint, I think the sooner we can start making those impacts, the better.
Councillor Eberly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through the chair to Chief Superintendent Tufik. When you were talking about the working model of the data to action plan, so my understanding, this happened, the data to action strategy worked, but now we're looking to how to put that information, like that first goal into work. It hasn't been done before. Is that my understanding?
So two different models. The data to action that's presently in play, and that we've been in communities right across the province and seen some very good effects, including right here in Wetaskiwin, is enforcement focused. So we have law enforcement partners around the table, but it's that kind of more reactive, outcome-based. We've had a lot of crime, so we need to be strategic about where we deploy patrols, for example, to disrupt that behavior, or we need to deploy an apprehension strategy to disrupt, a criminal who's in a crime cycle. So those are short-term kind of solutions and enforcement focused. What we're talking about now in the new model is expanding that to include community groups and other agencies to start looking at the broader issues of how do we start to leverage it. In a small way, our offender management program does that as we partner with addiction, social services, and health. But I think there's even more we can do, through some of those strategic partnerships. So it's about expanding what we're doing in data to action from enforcement to include some of those other agencies, both government and non-government.
Right, I think I understand. Thank you.
That's the new model.
Councillor Blatz.
Thank you. Karen, can we go back to the slideshow and go back to the slide that talked about the statistics of children? Awesome, thank you. So my first question is, are these numbers just the Wetaskiwin region?
It's the top three.
It's the top three all combined? Okay. Do we know how many of these crimes were domestic violence related?
I do. Unfortunately, I don't have that information handy at this point in time.
Yeah, that's okay. Would you say the good majority of it was?
I'm going to say from my recollection of the report, it's a mix. Mm-hmm. So I can't speak to the percentage at this point in time, but it's certainly not solely domestic violence related. There's a number of different contributing factors to the homicides. Okay,
for sure. And so it's proven that individuals under the age of 18 witnessing a violent crime can have devastating effects on their quality of life later on, as it increases the likelihood of emotional and behavioral issues. So I'm wondering, since these children witness traumatizing results of the violent crimes, what does the RCMP currently have in place as therapeutic measures for the victims and survivors?
Yeah, so our focus is generally enforcement. Obviously we have victim services that we offer and whatever supports and referrals they have. But I guess it speaks to my point that there aren't a lot of tools from a law enforcement perspective that I have available. It's about those partnerships and looking for ways to better deliver services at a at an important time that those children need. And law enforcement just isn't equipped for that. Our primary focus is, you know, the evidence collection and prosecution, getting the matter to court, and other than that victim services referral, which is very important, and obviously they have services that are available, but I don't think that really addresses that long-term problem that we're talking about, which is one of the things, why I raise it here is to say, I agree, it's hugely impactful for those children. We know that that's a factor, but that kind of speaks to those silos. We have services, I'd say, in the province available, but they're unable to respond unless they understand from, like us, what information we have that might intersect with that. So I think that allows us to be more effective in that service delivery.
Which that was what I was leading into is how do you think that the Community Safety and Wellbeing Committee can be used as a tool to assist victims more? And that's exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah, I think it's about building those processes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
If I may say something, Peter, to that, yes, I agree. The Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan would be able to identify those gaps and issues that are going on, what resources are available, what aren't, what supports are there. Yeah, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, guys.
Councillor Nielsen.
Karen, can you go to the slide that shows the various steps of the process?
Oh, I don't. I think that was from CNCP, but they might be able to put it up. You're talking about the workflow?
Put it up?
Yeah.
That's Audrey's slide, yeah.
While she brings it up, just one of the things that probably want to mention too, that most of the time we try to think of it as a linear step 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a little bit more complex than that, in case that was your question. But let's see if Audrey brings it up. By the way, thank you for the question that came before, and it just while she's still pulling it up, I wanted to mention there's lots of research that talks about adverse childhood experiences, which is exactly what the question was about, children witnessing. And the numbers are staggering, 10 times. So children that have 4 or more adverse childhood experiences are 10 times more likely to develop a drug use problem. They're 30 times more likely to have suicide attempts. They're, for example, 8 times more likely to perpetrate violence themselves. And those are children. It's not like they wanted to do this. These are experiences that have end up in some cases leading them to. And that's exactly what these plans to some degree are trying to address, is the idea on how to get ahead of the game, and so to protect those children and to support those children in these difficult times so that they don't perpetuate some of the behavior.
Thank you. I guess my first question is in relation to the process, and I understand it's not linear as the picture depicts. But typically, you cited some examples of communities that ended up with their safety plan in place. What kind of a timeline from beginning to end roughly were some of these? And again, I know that not everyone will be different, but as a benchmark, as they go through this process, to get to a strategy at the end? What kind of a timeline?
Yeah, I can tell you, depending on the size, anywhere between half a year, that's the shortest, but that's extremely difficult to do a thorough process, a process where the community really is able to rally around it, and up to 12 months. So quite often, the work in Regina, the work with Kelowna, both were somewhere in that area of about between 10 and 12 months, I believe, right, Audrey?
Yeah, I think even sometimes a little more than 12 months if there's a lot of consultations going on, but I think 12 months is a pretty solid benchmark.
And so that leads me to my next question, which ties into something that Councillor Billingsley was talking about, and that's like, what's a win after a year? And Audrey was talking about buy-in. And so it strikes me that you've got to have some wins along the way to continue the buy-in and actually build some momentum for community involvement and recognition that something's happening in your community. So where do you find your quick wins to sort of start the ball rolling in your community?
I can speak a little bit from the experience in some communities. I think a big win along the way is through the survey and the consultations is bringing the community in, centering the voices of the community, creating that level of engagement and involvement of community members and partners, which tends to, community will tell us it's great that we're being heard and that we have an opportunity to participate. I think too, the communication piece is really, really important. In some communities, we've actually brought in the communication staff for that community, and we've had some online platforms with some regular updates, communicating back what we're hearing to the community and allowing them to kind of react along the way and be really involved in the different steps has been quite positive as well. I think those are some of the initial thoughts. Felix, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I thought we could provide the example of the city of Regina where we started with, so when Audrey said bringing in communications, this is communications of the city of Regina was partnering on this. But the first thing they did is develop a video of the mayor explaining why this is important to the city. Why are they doing and what are we doing and how are we going to communicate back and what do we want from, or what does she as the mayor want? And you can actually find this if you go to City of Regina Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. You'll get to that page. Another thing is then there was a lot of engagement that we asked people to identify areas that they loved in their community and the areas that they were concerned. So that was also a moment where the general community could engage. And then there was a survey as well. So it created quite a bit of momentum that now has a lot of members in Regina being aware of there is something happening, things are being put in place, working groups are now starting to look at the areas that were identified as priorities in that kind of the third last step here.
If I could say something as well, and this is just based on one of the pilot sites that I spoke to today, a strong connector, a strong lead. And like Audrey said, lots of communication and understanding of what is being done, especially when you take your surveys that your public fills out, and a lot of them feel it's a waste of time. But once you start paying attention to what they've noted and remarked on, because this is a change in mindset, it is not, it's not an easy sell to everybody, but you have to persist and you have to continue to educate them on how important this is and how important it is in being proactive as opposed to being reactive.
If I can add just one last thing, which is, having experienced this even on the law enforcement front, where, I think people would typically think, okay, well, you guys are all connected, in these enforcement activities. But getting everybody in the same room, presenting like a problem and talking about the problems, that's a pretty big win. Like that's part of breaking down those silos and getting people working collaboratively as opposed to, because everybody tends to get carried away in their silo. But when you're at the table together talking about those collective problems, I think that's a win. I think the last part I would add that I think sums up some of what we've been saying is it's a tangible. It's a something that's being done. With a view to improving community safety and well-being. And I think it's given all of the things we've been talking about today, a sound strategy to move forward with that's like a tangible strategy.
I may have said this is my last question, but I'll try it again. This is my last question, maybe. A lot of Felix and Audrey's comments talk about communication and the community surveys going out and so on. If the RCMP take this role on, how do you foresee that important piece, the communication piece, being done by the RCMP as the lead, or do you see?
It doesn't have to be done by us. If that kind of answers the question, like we'd be happy to use. If it was the city of Wetaskiwin staff, that'd be great. We're administering it. We're happy to take on the administration, I'd say, of it and all of the stuff that would come with that. If it meant facilitating it, we're happy to do that. And I'll tell you, you know, part of the reason crime stats are up on our website, the public crime map is, we're very much working towards transparency in that communication, so people understand what the problems are, so we can actually partner to solve some of those problems and hear what they are. So it definitely fits into our strategy, but we don't have to be the communications lead. In fact, I'd say it'd be simpler if we weren't in some ways. So we're just happy to facilitate it.
And I guess for me, that's the tipping point, or as you know, part of the reason we were having trouble being the administrative lead is because of staffing limitations. And if you take it on, but we get the workload, and I'll use the word workload maybe inappropriately, but the workload of the communications, the survey, and all the rest of it, then we're back to to a big piece of finding staff to do that kind of thing. So then for me, the tipping point is, if we're going to be doing that, should we be doing the administration part as well? Do we give you the administration part, but then take on the communication part? Like, there's some wrestling and sifting and sorting in my head that's got to go on in terms as we should go down this road.
Can I jump in here, if it's possible? It's okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
We have a couple of thoughts, because we've been working with communities across the country, and in some cases we have done a lot of the administration that has been working on getting everything ready. We have a lot of the language, for example, that we've been communicating for certain and for these kind of issues. It helps, though, if the communication comes from the community or from the city, because of the level of buy-in, rather than from, let's say, from the RCMP or from us, because that gives a recognition of the buy-in. But again, the city of Regina hired, essentially moved someone into this position to work with us in partnership. But in other communities, in Morinville, it was the chief of fire, who's also the chief of community safety, and the RCMP representative, and together with us, and we did a lot of the heavy lifting around the administration as part of the contract that we had with them. And so it looks different. What would be really important is that it probably shouldn't look like in any way that it's not actually something the city of Wetaskiwin wants to be doing and is part of it. So if communication were to come from someone else, even if it's prepared by us and RCMP, but then comes from the city, I think that would be really important.
Thank you.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to the superintendent, I have a few questions, and they may be disjointed, but that's the way I am. Just regarding the community survey, our community is getting surveyed out. They're being asked for consultation. How are you going to make this unique so that people will want to participate in this? Because we keep putting out surveys, and we've got social needs, we got all these different results coming in, and they are getting tired of being surveyed or trying to consult with them. So how do you make this unique so they want to, you talk about buy-in, but they have to feel that they're really wanted? And I don't know how you do this, because they're getting tired.
So if I may, part of the reason, and I did speak to it a little bit at the beginning, we want to bring in CMNCP is because they do have experience working with communities right across the country. So these are not unique issues that you're talking about, I think, for communities everywhere, particularly when we're talking about communities that are crime impacted, right? Which is, often what drives these. So maybe I will ask Felix and Audrey from your experiences to share some of that. And that's frankly why they're such valuable partners to have at the table.
Yeah, I think what initially comes to mind is if there's already a lot of consulting and surveying that's going on in a community related to topics that feed into community safety, the key thing is to review that information and to not ask the same questions that, the community has already been asked and has already provided feedback on. So I think, leveraging the information that's existing and then identifying, okay, what are the gaps in that information? what do we want to dive deeper into, and then adjust our consultation questions and survey questions accordingly is quite important. I think too, a lot of it goes back to the communication, so the way in which the project is framed, being very transparent about, what the expectations are and what's in it for the community as well, right? Because this is, after all, a community safety plan. And I think what we've been noticing across the country is that community safety is a topic that is of interest to a lot of people. People, want to feel safe, want to feel well, want to know what's happening. COVID has had incredibly harsh impacts on people's safety and well-being as well. And so, having an opportunity to be part of something, to know that the city or the municipality is taking this issue seriously, tends to there is momentum already. People want to be part of that. So I think it's, again, about communicating it in a way where people see the value in it, see where it's going to lead, know what the expectations are, but then also being respectful of the feedback that they've already, shared, and making sure that we're not just duplicating that.
If I may just add something to this, what Audrey was saying, the question was, how do we make this different? And one of the things that we do, and we've been extremely successful with this, is rather than doing town halls where everyone can come to and express their frustration, we've been finding that for town halls, that's oftentimes an accessibility and a privilege question. And the people who are most affected by crime and violence are the ones that can't make it, because there may be a single parent that can come, there may be a person with a disability, they may not feel safe in that environment. And there is a saying that I've heard from someone in the European context that was saying, those that are the loudest about not feeling safe are also the ones that are least likely to be victimized. So in our case, what we've been doing with all the communities that we work with, we actually been going and partnering with local organizations and local community groups to talk to the people who are most impacted. So not a consultation process where then we get mostly the same voices, but we actually go out and talk to youth about their perceptions of safety and what some of their issues are. Talk to women, talk to Indigenous community members, talk to LGBTQ plus community members, because we know for a fact that they're actually the ones that are most likely to be victimized. Which I think, at least for those communities which tend to be not greatly engaged in these kind of processes, really gives them a buy-in and creates a way of being able to voice some of their concerns that often are being overheard.
Thank you. I like that answer. Just a couple of other things. You said the plan, when Councillor Nielsen asked the question, would take minimum 6 months and probably a year. So our first year, if we turn it over to the RCMP, is basically going to be data gathering. There will be no implementation of anything. It'll basically be gathering data to see where we go in the following years.
I would say, and I'll look to Felix and Audrey to correct me, it's about establishing it, getting the committee established, getting the direction established, getting the plan established. That's the year that and we talked previously, it would be with a plan to then transition it so that it's sustainable moving forward after that year.
And then it would just move into the community and the RCMP would back off.
We'd be partners, so we'd continue in partnership at the table. But we wouldn't administer the program anymore. We'd become one of the stakeholders at the table.
So the meter wouldn't be running then in the second year?
Well, the meter's always running, sir.
So, okay, talking about
it's just who's paying for it.
Yeah, okay, correct. So if the city were to pay for this, what would it cost us for 1 year?
So I'll let Felix answer that because they actually drafted a proposal.
Yes, I'll answer that in a second. One of the pieces that is a requirement, and that's actually best practice, is this idea of, sorry for answering that first, but it's this idea of, it's not just the multi-sectoral planning of a process like this, it is a multi-sectoral approach to implementing the plan. Because some of the pieces in this plan can be related to the education system. And in the communities that we've been helping develop these plans and that we've been helping implementing these plans, this committee that forms around this stays and continues oversight as a committee and hold each other accountable for it. What happens in a place like Morinville is where in that case it's the superintendent together with the chief of police, the chief of fire, and who's also the chief of safety, create the backbone organization to support their coming together, and so just make sure, and oftentimes reports back to council at the local level. So this is kind of how this looks like. It doesn't have to be a full-time position. In some communities, this is a part-time position, and some communities have made the decision. In fact, a lot of our plans include a sustainability on how to do the implementation of a plan like this, because and they're not all the same. They're recognizing the local realities. There could be financial realities. There could be realities around who is best positioned to actually do that. As part of the other question, which is what's the cost? Yeah, so we had at some point drafted a proposal, and that particular proposal, and I can tell you, it can range, these plan developments range anywhere, and that's a size question, somewhere in the 30,000 to up in the $50,000-$60,000. It really depends. In one community, we did, I think, 25 consultations with groups, just that alone. Plus, we did a project with youth on trying to understand the realities, a survey, and a lot of work that we did with them. And in some, it's less. It's a little bit of a question of size, of expectations. Unfortunately, and so here's the bad news, is smaller communities, it doesn't cost less than in a larger community, because what costs is, let's say, how many different consultations a community thinks should be done. And most often we recognize that if we want to talk about vulnerable populations, those are most affected by it, it gets really tricky if we were to say, oh, let's just do 6, because then the group has to decide who these 6 are, and some people will fall. And what we keep seeing is that it keeps going up, and eventually it just additionals are being added, because somebody's going to say, no, we can't do this without talking to single mothers. We can't do this without talking to seniors. There is, unfortunately, I mean, this is the sad state of every community across Canada, there's a lot of smaller groups that are more vulnerable to and experience a lack of safety. And having to figure out where that sweet number is a little bit tricky.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple other questions. Superintendent, would Maskwacis be part of this as well, or this will just be the city of Wetaskiwin all by itself?
So I think when the committee was conceived, I think the idea was to make it a regional committee. And there's no doubt, there's a relationship, I'd say, with the city, the county, and Maskwacis. Like, I definitely see a relationship from a policing standpoint across those 3 communities. But I think you got to start somewhere. And as I understand, some of the early, I'd say, development of the committee, there were some complications, we'd say, between the city and the county. But I think if we started here, the goal would be to eventually bring other people on board. But I think starting here makes the most sense, so that we get a plan established and a way forward, bearing in mind that there are going to be influences in the city of Wetaskiwin that come from the county and from Maskwacis that we'll have to be thinking about as that plan's put together.
Okay.
I think it'll inevitably come out in the development of the plan.
Okay.
As well.
Just a couple of other things. We do have an interagency that's been operating for more than 50 years, and there's a number of the service providers in our community, and that would be a really good group for you to get involved with and present to them. I think that would be good. The other thing is, you're talking about upstream, downstream, middle stream. I think upstream, we need to look at education. Councillor Nielsen and I are both retired educators, but you're trying to solve the problem downstream, which prevention upstream then we wouldn't have to be dealing with all of these things downstream. So I think we need to involve the provincial government, because obviously we don't have those funds, and neither do you. But I really think education is the key, and I think that there should be something in this plan that has education as well and counseling for the youth that will be needing it because they are victims of these crimes. So.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you. Anything further? Councillor Billingsley.
Thank you. Through the chair to administration, we had budgeted $50,000 for this last year, is that correct? Or the year before?
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor Billingsley, Council had originally approved $50,000 for the development of a community safety plan as part of the 2020 budget, I believe. And then in as part of the late 2020, we gained approval to have that money used for the development of community safety and well-being strategy.
And how much of that money has been spent?
$0.
Thank you. Just to follow up, and I guess this is to council, is I think we need to define our role in all of this. What is our role? What are our responsibilities? We talked about communication. I think we need to know upfront exactly what we are responsible for before we just jump into agreement and then find out, oh, we have to do this, and then administration and or staffing is unable or find that that is their priority. So I think that we need to do that first.
If we're turning this over to the RCMP to work on for the next year, that would give us the opportunity to find out what it is our responsibility is moving forward.
Correct. So the idea was to try and reduce the burden on city administration so that we could actually develop a plan to what your point is exactly at the end of that year for that transition. So part of what we'll develop out of this is a transition plan so that we can hand it over, and you will have a good understanding of like the requirements in making that examination. But Mayor, you're totally correct. That was the goal, is to take that burden off and take on whatever administrative requirements there are. Being mindful, we don't want to, we want to work with the city and the administration. So, we want to include you as much as you're able to be included, but the goal was to reduce the burden so that we could map that out over the next year and put you in a good position for that transition.
Good. I understand a motion to have this accepted as information, and then Councillor Nielsen. Any further discussion? Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just through to the Director of Community Services, keep talking about the goose that laid the golden egg, but the FCSS money that was left, could that be used towards this, the surplus from previous year?
Through the mayor to Councillor Elliott, I do believe that this would fall under social prevention work, but we'd have to confirm with Wetaskiwin FCSS to confirm.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Nielsen.
If I may, but there was a surplus at the end of 2021, leading into 2022? Okay, thank you.
Anything further? Ready for the question? Those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Good to see you again.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Councillor.
Item 10C, draft sponsorship and advertising policy.
All right, good morning, Mayor and Council. Can you guys hear me?
You bet.
All right, so myself and Natasha Grant, Manager of Recreation, are here seeking Council's feedback on the draft sponsorship and advertising policy, which provides guidelines around revenue generation through sponsorship and advertising. A little bit of background. The City of Wetaskiwin, as you know, operates a variety of facilities and spaces that the public uses for events throughout the year, which includes, but not limited to, the Civic Center, Drill Hall, ball diamonds, tennis courts, etc. These assets provide value to our businesses by offering viewership and locations to share their corporate story and means of advertising. Administration has identified the need to develop policy around sponsorship and advertising, which will assist in the provision of city services, programs, and events. Approval of the policy will ensure that relationships are improved and create clarity and focus around areas of need. The policy would also ensure the city's reputation and public are not harmed by providing corporate consistency in decisions to the naming and/or renaming of city property, building, spaces, and structures. The draft sponsorship and advertising policy applies to all city-owned property, and specifically for the first phase, we are looking at the naming of the Civic Center and assets within, which would include the drill hall. The policy does state that any naming rights would be pre-approved by council, and the length of sponsorship would be at a maximum of 10 years. So for stakeholder engagement, administration has connected with the current stakeholders, including minor hockey, Iceman, and the curling rink, which currently engages with local businesses for advertising opportunities along rink boards and walls in both arenas, as well as the curling rink in the multiplex. These funds we estimate are at about $10,000 per year, which stakeholders use to offset registration fees and their operating costs. So we would recommend that the current advertising agreements with these stakeholders would be extended for 1 year, which would provide us time to have further discussions around possible revenue sharing possibilities. Consultation, the draft policy was based off a number of reputable municipalities in similar size and opportunity. It was also reviewed by Alberta Council. The draft policy supports Council's strategic plans through both economy by leveraging opportunities, as well as community, where everyone is welcome to be part of our evolving story. So in next steps, we would bring back the draft sponsorship and advertising policy to council with feedback reflected at the July 11th council meeting. When the policy is approved, policy CO021 would have to be rescinded. And then we will also work with stakeholders to update any advertising agreements for the 2022 and 2023 years. And with that, I open it up to any questions and/or feedback.
Entertain a motion to accept as information.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Elliott. Questions? Go ahead.
Thank you. I had a few that I sent out, Mr. Mayor. First of all, related to sponsorship and advertising, 7.3 relates to alcohol. I'm just wondering, has advertising for smoking or smokeless tobacco been banned in Canada? If not, we should make sure that that's in our policy as well.
Correct, I can answer that. So through the chair to Councillor Elliott, yes, that's definitely something that we're going to add into the policy. Tobacco is heavily regulated, so that's something that we wouldn't want to have, but there'll be a statement that we'll add in about what's acceptable and what is not.
Yeah, and I forgot smokeless tobacco, but yes, okay, thank you. Yeah. Also, there may be requests in the future for placing advertising, excuse me, on walking trails or benches or some of those. So I think we need to make sure that that's reflected in the policy as well.
Yeah, so this policy states that it's any city-owned property. So the policy would reflect walking trails, ball diamonds, tennis courts, any of those sort of facilities as well.
Thank you. And just the terms of advertising, I just suggested that they not be forever. It happened in Grand Prairie where they had a beverage company and they left them as the sponsor forever. And so forever that arena will be called that. So I'm just making sure that we don't have long-term contracts.
We do not. So yeah, so through the chair, so the policy does state that the maximum amount of time that would be allocated would be 10 years, and then any agreements would be renegotiated. So any naming or any sort of agreements would come through either administration or council, and the maximum would be 10 years.
Okay, thank you. And the last question is the responsibility for maintaining the signs. Like if there was a sign on the ball diamond or the tennis court that's getting weathered and the sponsor has agreed to continue to sponsor year after year, who's responsible for maintaining the signs?
I think that would come down to what we put into the agreement, but typically it is through the city that would be responsible for updating or maintaining signage, but that's something that we could look at through the agreement if and when we need to look at that.
Yeah, I was thinking also of vandalism. If we had something outside at the tennis court and it got vandalized, then we need to make sure who's responsible.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott. Councillor Nielsen.
Just a point of clarification on item 6.7, and you were speaking to it in relation to the length of terms in naming rights. And it says, must be for a specified time that is less than 10 years and may never continue in perpetuity. Does that mean they may continue in perpetuity?
They may, there's another, sorry, through the chair, there's another point there that says that we can renegotiate at any time.
Right. But I guess I'm wondering whether the word may even needs to be there. And it would never continue in, oh, it may never. I see what you're saying. So it could be renegotiated year after year after year in perpetuity.
There's nothing saying that just because you meet the requirements that the city is going to re-sign an agreement with you, so it may not continue in perpetuity.
May never, may not. Anyway. That's fine, I'll leave it.
Councillor Aberley.
Excuse me, thank you, Mr. Mayor Gandam. Through the chair to, through the chair, I have a comment and a question, so I'm going to just start with my question. I don't understand what the impact will be on the groups that use our facilities. So if, for example, minor hockey is currently selling space during their games for advertising, what impact would this policy have on them?
Tasha, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, through the chair to council. Good morning. So currently those groups rely on the revenue they bring in from sponsorship. And the way the policy is, it's saying that the city would then take over that. So that's why administration is recommending an extension for those contracts so we can further explore possible revenue sharing opportunities so those clubs don't completely potentially lose out on that opportunity.
Okay, and then my comment, going to sponsorship categories 5.0, I recommend that you take out specific examples from the policy. And my reasoning behind this is that in C, you use a specific example that I don't believe is correct with the Canada Day celebrations. So in that sense, even into this year, that could change in the future, but this year, that's not how it's working. So specific examples out, please. Thank you.
Noted, and thank you.
Anything further? Natasha?
I'm all good, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
I know that it'll come back for debate moving forward. One of the things that I would have an issue with is that the groups that are currently selling advertising space, I don't know that the city should be taking that over, regardless of whether we give them a transition period or work out something on that. I think if they're doing the work to do that, and I also appreciate that they're advertising in city buildings, but they've been doing it this way for a number of years to offset costs that they have. So that'll be something that I will have to consider, I guess, moving forward, and what that looks like for those existing groups that are currently selling advertising space. Anything further? We're ready for the question. Those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thanks, Raylene. Thanks, Natasha.
Thank you.
10D, staff reports for information.
So I am bringing forward the land acknowledgement. This was a notice of motion made by Councillor Blatz at the April 11th meeting. I used my network of clerks in Alberta to contact just how their councils had done this in either their procedural bylaws or if it was a preference. I won't read through my entire report that was presented to council. And so we're just asking for the report to be accepted as information, and there are alternate options as well in the RFD. If there's any questions, I can answer them.
Good. Looking for a motion, Councillor Billingsley.
I move that City Council accepts this report as information.
Moved by Councillor Billingsley. Any discussion? Councillor Elliott.
Oh, did you have your hand up? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In general, I did 3 sessions on land acknowledgement, and I sent the notes to council and to the communication department, but one of the main thing was not to make it generic, but to make it specific to our area and to the indigenous peoples that are around us and different aspects of that. And so I just suggest that that be looked at if we're going to go forward with this. Thank you.
Councillor Billingsley.
Thank you. Through the chair, I think that from what I've read, that it's very important that it's a heartfelt acknowledgement. And I really have troubles when it's forced upon somebody if it isn't actually heartfelt. Is there anything from stopping someone from making that acknowledgement within our meetings if they feel that that's an important thing to do?
I think for a chair, I don't think there's anything saying that you can't. I don't.
Like, in other words, what I'm trying to say is that if you felt that that was a very important thing and it's coming from your heart, then you could add it. But to force somebody to say it when, for whatever reason, they don't feel that it's important to them, doesn't seem like the right thing to do.
Yeah. And for me, with land acknowledgements, for me, I think that it's just that while you're recognizing, acknowledging the land of which we gather, if it's just checking a box at every meeting, at every opportunity that you're doing a land acknowledgement, I don't think that you're doing anybody any favors by saying the words every time you gather or meet. For me, when I'm at a special event or when we're hosting meetings with delegates from outside of our community, I feel that it's important that something like that gets acknowledged. So I leave that to whoever's leading the meeting to be able to do that. If they don't, and when it's my turn to speak, then I'll offer that land acknowledgement at that time. But like I said, checking a box and doing the land acknowledgement for every meeting or every gathering that we have, I don't feel as genuine, and that was one of the reasons that I don't do it for a regular council meeting or committee of the whole or anything else like that. For me, it's when we gather specially and we've got delegates or special guests coming from outside the community. Councillor Aberley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through the chair to council, in general, to talk about my opinion, I agree 100%. We need to have a land acknowledgement that comes from the heart, and that it is something that should not be every time we meet. It should say the exact same thing. It should say a prescribed wording. Where I am in favor of it becoming part of council, like procedural council procedure, is we are, even as the chair, the spokesperson of council, the spokesperson of our administration of City Hall, and acknowledging that we are on this land, traditional land that has been home for centuries and has given us so much, that is, I'm in favor of a land acknowledgement, but not necessarily the exact words. And then that can be where a chair is speaking from their heart or not speaking from their heart, but us as a political entity acknowledging the land we're on. So, thank you.
Councillor Blatz.
Thank you. So coming from an Indigenous perspective, the whole point of land acknowledgements, like as Mayor Gandam was saying, is that it does come from the heart. However, it doesn't mean that you have to give a speech every single time that is from the heart. So to me, something that is a heartfelt connection would be something that was on bullet point 3 of this presentation, which is that council members and elders from neighboring Indigenous communities were presented with multiple statements to choose from. So to me, heartfelt doesn't mean that you have to come up with something new to say every time. Heartfelt to me means that you had a connection to the people that were creating this land acknowledgement. So if we're sitting down and creating connections with the neighboring communities, if we're sitting down and we're trying to communicate to them that we want to take the first step in reconciliation as a city, I think that that is more meaningful than just saying we need to come up with a new speech every single time and that's going to become so daunting and all of that. To me, acknowledging the land that we sit on is important to have at the beginning of a city council meeting. We're sitting on stolen land, and to acknowledge that as a city, every single time that we have a meeting is something that I think is showing respect. It's showing that we acknowledge that we are in a point of privilege for being on this land right now as settlers, and that we are the city we share. We want to share our community with our Indigenous neighbors and acknowledge the fact that a quarter of our city is Indigenous. And so to me, to say that it's not going to be meaningful every single time, I think that there's an issue of not feeling like it's meaningful every time. We should feel like it's meaningful every time we say it. It shouldn't just be, oh, well, now I have to say this and I'm being forced to say something. It should be, we are acknowledging that we are on stolen territory, and that should not be something that we should feel like we're forced into. It's something that we should be taking within ourselves and acknowledging that within ourselves and then projecting that onto our community as well. So to me, this is something that is taking a first step in reconciliation, and it's also acknowledging the fact that Wetaskiwin's third goal is to be an inclusive city. And currently we aren't doing anything on inclusivity. So I think that this would be a great first step in changing our procedural bylaw.
Anything further?
Follow-up question. If we accept this as information, then it just dies and there's nothing that happens with it, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Anything else? Ready for the question? Those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We are going to take an 8-minute break, and we will resume with bylaws.
Do you mind hitting the button, please?
All right, we're going to reconvene. All right, number 12, bylaw 2019-22 to amend the land use bylaw 1804. Karen just blocked my screen.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. 1804-13 to provide for seasonal commercial patio regulations. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. So we are bringing forward this amendment to the land use bylaw as requested by Council. And this really is the follow-up of the temporary patio policy that was put in place in 2020 in response to the impact of COVID-19 restrictions on particularly restaurants. So we instituted this pilot program, it was 2021, to allow temporary patios for food service uses. The purpose of this program was to allow businesses to provide more seating because those restrictions primarily restricted the number of people that could be in confined spaces. So the policy included provisions for temporary patios either on private or public property. So just a quick review of that policy. We had 4 restaurants that applied for and were issued patio permits. All 4 of these applications were for patio areas on private property, occupying spaces within the business's parking lot. So this, I guess really this isn't exactly what we imagined as far as the patios. We did expect that there would be more uptake for patios in front of businesses, particularly on Main Street and things like that. We haven't done any digging into why we didn't get any uptake on that. There could have been many reasons. Could have been that businesses just weren't prepared to operate that way. So essentially, we have gone forward and taken most of the regulations from that temporary patio permit policy because we do see that most of them probably are applicable to a long-term patio strategy, and so we've carried most of them over, amended slightly in ways that we've thought appropriate for a more long-term strategy. And yeah, we'll see how that works. So ultimately, patios these days are an expected feature in the urban environment, and so we wanted to bring this amendment forward to change the land use bylaw so that these can be allowed going forward permanently. Of course, they're an opportunity for people to take advantage of the good weather, to eat and drink outside, share good times together, and it's something that businesses expect and that visitors to Wetaskiwin come looking for. So we wanted to make sure that we are allowing, that businesses can be allowed to operate this way. And so in our review of the typical types of patios that spring up here and there, we concluded that here in Wetaskiwin, the best way forward would be to regulate 2 types of patios. So the first is outdoor restaurant patios. So these are those patios on private land that are developed as an accessory to an approved restaurant or other dine-in food service. And then the second type is sidewalk patios, which are also accessory to an existing restaurant, but these would take up an area of public space in front of the restaurant. So if you can imagine, typically would be in a Main Street type setting where the business has a 0 lot line in front. They would place their seating and tables out in public space. So we've developed regulations to ensure that doesn't impose too much on the public land and that can operate smoothly with the existing restaurant. So our proposed zoning and development regulations, I'll talk about the outdoor restaurant patios first. So this is actually a currently defined use in the land use bylaw. And the definition right now is just an extension of an enclosed outdoor area adjacent to or adjoining a restaurant. Just, I guess, a side note, there's also a separate defined use for licensed restaurant patio, which is defined as an extension of an enclosed outdoor area adjacent to or adjoining a restaurant with a Class A liquor license. So there is this separate definition for those restaurants with a Class A liquor license. We are proposing to remove this because it really is redundant, and we can keep the outdoor restaurant patio as covering both types of restaurant. And essentially, whether there's liquor involved or not will depend on whatever liquor license the main business has. We don't need two definitions for it, so just wanted to mention that because it is part of the amendment there. So yes, these outdoor restaurant patios are developed on private property as an accessory to an approved restaurant, pub, lounge, nightclub, or bar. So those are defined uses in the Land Use Bylaw that are food service type uses. They'll be required to obtain a development permit and may be developed as a permanent feature or erected seasonally. So the concept there being that it really is a development. It's essentially, well, it's similar to if the business was going to build an addition to the building itself. This just likely doesn't have a roof. So they will be required to comply with all applicable aspects of the Land Use Bylaw and the Alberta Building Code, as well as any applicable AHS or AGLC regulations. So where these things will be allowed, zoning. So administration proposes that where there is an existing and approved restaurant, pub, lounge, nightclub, or bar, an outdoor restaurant patio should be allowed as a permitted accessory use. So an outdoor restaurant patio will not be approved unless there is an approved permit for one of those existing uses. And so there's this table here. And I will just highlight that where there are blanks, so essentially that means that that use type is not allowed in that zone. There are some quirks here, particularly you'll notice in the C5 where restaurant is not allowed. Only licensed restaurant is allowed as a permitted use, and this appears to be a quirk of the bylaw as it is. And I'm not sure why that isn't allowed there, but it does appear, it does seem like that should be an allowable use in that zone. So I just want to highlight that because since that was a little outside the scope of patios, I didn't address adding restaurant uses or pubs and lounges to that C5 zone, but I certainly can if council so desires. I will actually also highlight, so the far right column there, that outdoor restaurant patio, proposed land use bylaw change. Again, you'll see that we have added the P for permitted wherever there is an existing restaurant use. And in the zoning wording, for each of these zones, it is worded that it's a permitted use as long as there is an existing restaurant. So just to make sure that it is very clear there. I will also highlight there is a slight error on this table in that same column on the far right there. Under that C5 zone, there's a P missing, but I will highlight that that is an error and there should be a P there since licensed restaurant is a use. We do want to make sure that patios are a use that can be associated with that. And in the amending bylaw, that is addressed in that C5 zone, which is 6.20 of the land use bylaw. So as far as the development regulations for outdoor patios, currently there are just 2 points of regulation there regarding parking and regarding separation distance. So if there is an outdoor restaurant patio within 75 meters of a residential zone, it can only operate between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. So we're going to carry that policy forward to make sure that neighborhoods are not unduly disrupted during nighttime hours. So that's carried over to the proposed regulations. Regulation that they shall only be approved as an accessory use so that we don't have any standalone patios. Shall comply with the Alberta Building Code with respect to accessibility. So whether there needs to be ramps put in place for accessibility, gates, swinging, and things like that must be considered. They shall be located to minimize parking stall loss. So we decided not to include actual hard parking numbers and leave it up to businesses to determine whether they are leaving enough parking for their patrons. The parking rules within the Land Use Bylaw are destined to be reviewed sometime soon. And so we thought this is the best way forward right now. And if there are issues with it, we can address those when we review the parking rules as a whole. These patios shall employ colors and materials that complement the adjacent business, shall be maintained in a safe and orderly manner, shall not extend in front of any building exit, and shall ensure that emergency egress complies. These will be inspected by the fire department as well as part of the permit process. Shall not affect vehicular or pedestrian traffic, and is also responsible for obtaining all relevant permissions from AGLC, AHS, etc. And that's a similar regulation for restaurants as well. Moving on to sidewalk patios. So these are the installations of patio furniture on a temporary basis on public property adjacent to a restaurant. So typically these are the sets of tables and chairs that are set on the sidewalk in front of a restaurant. So the concept here is that these won't require a development permit, but they will be required to comply with the regulations. So these regulations are there to ensure that the patio doesn't infringe upon safe and easy pedestrian passage, and that the patio is put away when the business is closed, so as not to encumber the public space when the business is not in use. So quick list of regulations here. So they shall only be installed as an accessory to an existing restaurant or similar use. They shall only occupy the area abutting the frontage of the lot on which the business resides, and shall not occupy the space abutting any other property's frontage. They shall not extend in front of any building exit, and shall ensure that emergency egress complies with applicable regulations. Shall allow clear path on the pedestrian travel on the sidewalk of at least 2 meters. Shall not impede sightlines at intersections, be kept in neat and tidy order, shall be monitored at all times by the owner of the business, shall only be up when the business is open, and shall be entirely removed from public land when the business is closed, and again be responsible for obtaining any permissions from other authorities. So a quick review of the approval process. So these outdoor restaurant patios will require a development permit, and this actually is no change to the current process because it is a use that's in there right now. The only amendment really is in the regulations and the concept there, but yes, they will require a development permit. This will include, they must submit a site plan, summary of the parking requirements, and will allow for fire services to do an inspection as part of that process. The sidewalk patios will not require a development permit, but will be required to comply with all of the regulations. So essentially the regulations are in the Land Use Bylaw, so that if there is a business that is not in compliance with one or more of the regulations, we can follow through with enforcement action under the Land Use Bylaw. And so that is, that's the summary of the details here at this point. So we are bringing this forward for first reading for the amendment to the Land Use Bylaw. So if first reading is approved here, the next step would be a public hearing. And so our recommendation is that be scheduled for July 11th, 2022, and we'll advertise that accordingly. And I believe that is all that I have for you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott.
I would move that City Council approve first reading of Bylaw 2019-22.
Moved by Councillor Elliott. Any discussion? Go ahead.
I just had one question regarding smoking. So if you have an outdoor patio, what are the regulations? And like the government has a regulation about 5 meters within the door or of an exit of a building or in front of a building. So what are the regulations with an outdoor patio?
Yeah, to Councillor Elliott, as far as I understand right now, so there is the Tobacco Reduction Act, and I think it also covers vaping and cannabis as well. And so the regulation there, provincial regulation, is that, yeah, there is no smoking within 5 meters of an air intake, window, or door. So probably for a lot of these that would be covered, since especially the sidewalk ones, they're not very big. But it is possible that there is an aspect of the patio that is further than 5 meters from the door. So we don't have any local bylaws or regulations, as far as I know, that say no smoking of tobacco. We do have the bylaw that covers smoking cannabis in public, so that's not allowed anywhere. But if it is something that you're concerned about, we can add some aspects that addresses smoking on patios into this bylaw.
So the government regulation that we have now, I've noticed one patio where they are smoking within 5 meters of the exit. And so is that bylaw that enforces that, or the RCMP? It would be our peace officers, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Anything else? We're ready for the question. Those in favor? Carried unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I would move that City Council schedule a public hearing for Bylaw 2019-22 for July 11th, 2022.
Moved by Councillor Elliott. Any discussion? Ready for the question. Those in favor? Carried unanimously. Item 15, in-camera section 24. Go ahead.
I move that City Council proceeds with the meeting in an in-camera session to discuss a matter which falls under Section 24 of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, exceptions to disclose.
Moved by Councillor Aberle. Ready for the question. Those in favor? Carried. You're in camera.
Through the chair, I have sat on this committee for, I'm going to say, a year and a half, possibly. And I've got great concerns going forward. We have not actioned anything in a year and a half, and I'm concerned that this is just more of the same. And I know we haven't spent any of that $50,000 that was budgeted a year and a half or 2 years ago, but I really expect and want to see results and something concrete. To spend $50,000 and have meetings to have meetings, to me is just not acceptable. I want to see results.
Councillor Nielsen?
Thank you. I don't disagree. My concern is if we don't do this, then what? I mean, we did put safety as a high priority in our community, and our residents have expressed, each one of us, I think, that it's a big issue for them. So if this is not something that we feel we can support, then what have we got left? And my thinking is we don't. I was encouraged by the presentation today, to be honest. It sounds like a number of communities going through the process that is outlined have at least got some kind of paper document at the end that has some actionable items. Because just having the meetings, as you say, Dean, to have meetings is not serving anybody well. So I think we've got to act on it, and only because we don't have anything else to lean on. My other comment, though, I guess, would be through the chair to Paul. If we project to the end of June 13, 2023, and then transitioning this thing back to the city, then the very request that you had in this budget, I suspect, would probably be coming back in the next budget sequence to be someone to manage, direct, and action outcomes from this work.
Through the Mayor to Councillor Nielsen, you know, the committee as it currently stands right now has a number of groups in the community. So we've got the school board, Wetaskiwin FCSS, Wetaskiwin RCMP detachment, number of stakeholders. I think with the RCMP taking this on, having more of an administrative focus, it's going to broaden the number of players around the table, which I think is a benefit in that when the year does pass, I believe, and my optimistic nature is that it will be very clear on who should lead this moving forward. Where I stand on the community development front is that unless we get a motion directing us to go down that path as a business, I won't be bringing anything forward. We've gone down that road. Council has made the decision not to get into that business, which I do respect. And so unless a motion comes from council, I don't think you'd see us entertain to bring that back. But I do believe that in a year's time, a number of groups in the community, there'll be an opportunity for someone else to take this. And at that point in time, we'll be already moving, it'll be going, and it should be a lot easier to oversee.
Through the chair to Paul again, but is it appropriate that you remind us at budget time that this is sitting there and do we want to act on it, as opposed to just leaving it to this group to say, hey, what about something? Because we're going to be in the middle of a year when we're starting to talk about budgets again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, through the Mayor to Councillor Nielsen, we can do our best to remind you folks on, where we're at and how we've moved forward. Other municipalities as well, council does make business cases, right? They can write them and submit them as part of the process. So we should, I don't know if we've spoken with finance much about that internally, but that's a good process we could look at bringing here.
Yeah, I just don't want to miss the opportunity to have a conversation to see where we as a collective stand when we start talking at budget time. Thank you.
Maybe ask that question.
Go ahead, Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just wondering, can we ask for reports on a quarterly basis or something from this administrative body, so that the RCMP gives us, they've been going along and now they do, here's what we've done for 3 months, here's what we've done for 6 months. So then if we get into a situation, as Councillor Nielsen suggested, maybe we would at least be prepared.
We could ask them.
Because to give them 12 months, carte blanche, to me, we should be apprised of something along the way.
We've got a chair member or a board member that sits on that committee.
And that will continue?
Yep.
Oh, okay. I wasn't aware of that. I thought that the RCMP were going off and...
Nope.
So
No,
Councillor Billy...
The CMNCP and the data action that they're working on, as it stands right now, it still stays as a city committee, and our representative would still be there, so we should still be getting updates from...
So we should get them monthly then?
Or however often the meeting's happening. So we have that
Thank you.
opportunity and we have that connection
Okay.
to the committee still.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think that it's also, the onus is still on council to bring things like this forward too. It's nice to have administration to be able to bring information back or remind us to do something, but it's still our responsibility to do that as well. So make yourself a note, put it in your calendar and say in 6 months you want to revisit it or whatever it is that you want to do, that you're taking that onus upon yourself as well, not just relying on administration. Anything further? Ready for the question. Those in favor? Carried. Item 16B, Proclamation Policy.
Right, that would be me. All right, so through a notice of motion, this is why we are bringing this policy forward for the proclamation policy. So as it shows in the report, we were just making some modifications to our current proclamation policy. I did notice in the policy, I did make the same statement twice, and I would like to remove one of the lines in the policy, and that is that the City of Wetaskiwin shall not provide media coverage for proclamations. Let me just slide this over. So it's on page 1 of the policy. In the process that I have on the second page, it is included in the process. So my ask when we're approving the policy today is just to make sure that I remove this from the policy. So
the first one?
The first one, yes. So I think it's unnecessary to have it twice. So other than that, policy is similar to our previous one. And any questions, please let me know.
Councillor Billingsley?
I move that City Council approves CO-020 Proclamation Policy as presented.
Moved by Councillor Billingsley. Any discussion? Councillor Elliott?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just 2 questions. Number 1, in the definition, it says, for the purpose of raising awareness about local efforts. There are some international and Canadian programs as well that may require a proclamation. I'm thinking about Cancer Day and like Cancer Month from the Canadian Cancer Society. They will reflect upon local, but some of them may be international in scope or national in scope. So I'm just wondering, are we restricting ourselves to local efforts?
We could include local and national efforts. That is something that we could amend the policy to.
Okay. And the other question that I had was, it says that proclamation cannot be read during a council meeting. Can it be read prior to a council meeting?
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Elliott, yes, it can be done. City of Leduc, I believe, does post their proclamations prior to their meetings. So yes, it's possible.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything further? Councillor Aberley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through the chair to council, I'm just referring to Councillor Elliott's comment about local efforts. I'm thinking rather than, because once you say local and then national, I'm wondering if the raising awareness for locally relevant efforts, right, is rather than putting into other levels of things, adding the word relevance locally, because that still would exist is with the Cancer Society's efforts in general, that is locally relevant. So we would be things that, it's just a more open definition.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I would agree with that. I'm thinking of, like, even Remembrance Day, you make a proclamation about all of the different aspects of Remembrance Day, and that's a national thing, but it is relevant to our community, so.
And it still falls into one of the requests, like meeting the following criteria, it would fall into something like that. So I don't know that. Go ahead.
And I think that number 2 speaks to that. Is the cause of the is one of the benefits or interests of the majority of residents. So whether it's Remembrance Day and or the Canadian Cancer Society, but yet if it's a wildfire in some other community that doesn't necessarily affect us.
But it's still a public awareness campaign.
Right.
So it's covered in the criteria.
Right.
I don't know that maybe it just says should be specific to a time period or for the purpose of raising awareness about a local effort. And then it's still a discretionary.
Yeah.
Can we make that a should?
And which one?
Under the definitions?
Where would you like to include should?
I don't know.
Sorry. I did. No, it's okay.
Should commemorate.
Proclamation is a ceremonial document that should commemorate a specific time period for the purpose of raising awareness about local efforts. Okay. Councillor Aberley.
If I may, I think maybe what we might be getting stuck on is the local efforts, is the word efforts.
For me, I would still prefer to see that it should be about local efforts, but then we've got the public awareness or things like Remembrance Day or a cancer proclamation that doesn't necessarily have a local origin, but it still has an effect to the community.
Yeah,
and I still have that discretion of.
Councillor Aberley, are you okay with making this amendment to the motion if I tag your name on it?
Yes.
Okay, to the amendment. Anything further? Are we ready for the question? Those in favor? Carried unanimously. Back to the motion. Anything else? Emery's yours taken out as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ready for the question? Those in favor? Carried unanimously. Item 16C, notice of motion, council budget and expenses policy.
Here we go.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that City Council directs administration to update the existing remuneration policy to be presented at the August 22nd, 2022 regular council meeting for further input.
Moved by Councilor Nielsen. Yeah, go ahead.
I guess right off the top, I believe we can do a better job of informing the public how we are compensated above and beyond our compensation rates for attendance at approved events and activities committee work. And right now, I don't believe there's any real visible connection between our event attendance reports that we report on monthly, our expense claim and per diems that we submit monthly, the actual reporting of the event or what took place at the event that we are to report before we get compensation, and transparency. And I'd like to see the remuneration policy be updated to provide a connection between all these elements that we're required to put together. So for example, and I'm not trying to direct administration, but for example, event attendance form that we submit could have a checkbox that says, beside this one, I'm expecting remuneration, and besides the other four, there's no checkbox for remuneration, and there might even be a space there that says I'm asking for $10,000 for attending this conference. That would certainly pique the public's curiosity as to why I'm checking off $10,000. But and then you could even require the report to be filed with that, the reporting of the event to be filed at the time we report our event attendance, there we go. And then make it public somehow on our website. So that way the public has a better idea of what we're doing on a monthly basis, what we're being paid for attending some of those functions. They have the opportunity to see what our reports might consist of, and it's all out in the open. And to me, it ties all of those reportings together. That's it, that's all.
Councillor Blatz.
I just want to make a friendly amendment because there is no meeting on August 22nd. It would be the third Monday in August, so it would be August 15th.
Through the chair to Councillor Blatz, at the organizational meeting in October, it was decided that the council meeting is on August 22nd.
I did not remember that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I would accept that friendly amendment.
Anything further? Ready for the question? Those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Councillor Blatz.
I move that we adjourn.
Those in favor? I'm just going to start proclaiming it.